Ethan Parker loved quiet mornings. He loved the sound of birds in his garden, the smell of fresh coffee, and the peace of living in a friendly neighborhood. At least, that's what he thought he had. But peace doesn't last long when the HOA is watching. One cool Monday morning, Ethan stepped outside to pick up his newspaper, and froze. A bright red paper was taped to his front door. In bold black letters it read, "Violation number 47, unauthorized garden decorations." Ethan blinked in confusion. His garden decorations? You mean the 2 sunflowers by his fence? The ones his daughter planted for school? It wasn't the first time either. This was the 10th notice this month. 2 weeks ago they fined him because his grass was half an inch too tall. Last week they said his mailbox wasn't the right shade of brown. And now, sunflowers. At first, Ethan thought it was all just a mistake. Maybe the HOA was being overly strict. But when he walked into the next community meeting, he realized the truth. Every fine, every complaint, every warning. They all came from one person, Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president. She sat at the head of the table, smiling that sharp, fake smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Parker," she said sweetly, "we all have to follow the rules. Even you." Ethan stayed polite. "With respect, Mrs. Callahan, these rules don't make sense. I'm not breaking anything serious." She leaned forward, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Rules are rules," she whispered. "And if you don't like them, maybe you should find another neighborhood." That night, Ethan sat on his porch in silence. The street was quiet, but he could feel the eyes of his neighbors. Some looked away, afraid to get involved. Others whispered about the man who kept causing trouble. He looked at his garden, small, bright, harmless. Yet to the HOA it was a battlefield. Then came the letter that changed everything. A formal warning. Failure to comply may result in eviction proceedings and further action. Eviction. Over sunflowers. Ethan's hands shook as he read it. Anger built slowly, like a storm behind his calm eyes. He had followed every rule. He had paid every fine. But it was never enough. That's when something inside him snapped. He folded the paper carefully, set it on the table, and whispered to himself, "If they want to fight, I'll give them one." But he wasn't planning a loud fight. No shouting, no drama. Ethan was going to play a smarter game, one the HOA would never see coming. Over the next few days, he started taking photos of everything. The broken sidewalk near the HOA office, the board members parking in no parking zones, Mrs. Callahan's husband mowing his lawn at 10 p.m. without a warning notice. He smiled quietly every time. Neighbors thought he'd given up. Mrs. Callahan thought she'd won. But Ethan was only getting started. Because behind that calm face and quiet tone, he was building something powerful, a plan. And when it was done, the same people who mocked him would soon be begging for his forgiveness. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just rising and the air felt sharp and cold. But inside him, something new was burning, determination. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street. Every car that passed, every neighbor who waved, every patrol from the HOA, he noticed it all. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just a homeowner. He was an observer. He began to document everything. He took pictures of houses with overgrown lawns, faded fences, or cracked driveways, all things that had gone unpunished. He recorded the HOA board's meetings, where Mrs. Callahan bragged about keeping the neighborhood perfect. But the truth was she was only keeping it perfect for her friends. Ethan discovered that some homes never got warnings, even though they clearly broke the same rules he did. Those houses? They all belonged to the HOA board members. It made him laugh, but not out of humor, out of disbelief. "This isn't about rules," he whispered. "It's about control." Every night Ethan gathered more proof. He built a secret folder on his laptop, labeling it HOA files. Inside it, he kept photos, recordings, and scanned letters of every fine he'd ever received. It was a quiet kind of war, one fought with patience, not anger. When the next HOA meeting arrived, Ethan came prepared. The room was filled with neighbors, most of them silent, afraid to speak. Mrs. Callahan sat at the front again, her pearls shining, her voice smooth like oil. "Mr. Parker," she began, flipping through papers, "we've noticed your grass is still a bit uneven and your fence." Ethan interrupted gently. "Mrs. Callahan, before you continue, I'd like to ask something." The room went quiet. He stood up, holding his phone. "I've reviewed the HOA's landscaping guidelines. They say grass height should not exceed 4 inches. Mine is 3.7. Also about my fence, it matches the approved neighborhood color code, section 12, paragraph 2. Mrs. Callahan blinked, surprised. Well, perhaps you're mistaken. I'm not, Ethan said calmly. But I did notice Mr. Whitman's fence next to yours is bright blue. That doesn't seem approved, does it? The room stirred. Eyes turned. Whispers spread. Mrs. Callahan's smile cracked. This is not the time or place to. Actually, Ethan cut in softly, I think it's exactly the time. For a moment, the whole room fell silent, and Ethan saw something flicker across her face. Fear. He sat down again, quiet but confident. He had shown them just a hint of what he knew. Just enough to make them nervous. After the meeting, 2 neighbors approached him outside. Ethan, one said glancing around, you're brave. We've all been scared to say anything. They fine us for everything. Ethan nodded. Then maybe it's time someone stopped them. From that day on, word began to spread, quietly in whispers. More neighbors started coming to Ethan, sharing their own stories. Hidden fines. False charges. Threats. He listened to everyone. He gathered every document. And piece by piece, a bigger picture began to form. A picture of corruption. Mrs. Callahan and her board weren't just enforcing rules. They were breaking them, and using HOA money to do it. Ethan smiled to himself one evening as he looked at the thick folder of evidence growing on his desk. This isn't just about me anymore, he said softly. This is about everyone they've hurt. And as the moonlight fell across his quiet street, Ethan made himself a promise. He wouldn't stop until the truth came out. The war had begun. But it was one Ethan intended to win. Ethan knew fighting the HOA openly was dangerous. Mrs. Callahan was powerful. She had friends on the city council, neighbors who feared her, and a board that followed her every command. So, instead of fighting in the open, Ethan decided to fight in the shadows. He started visiting the public records office downtown, pretending he was just a curious homeowner. There he found the HOA's financial statements, open to the public, but rarely checked by anyone. When the clerk handed him the papers, Ethan's eyes widened. Something was off. There were huge payments marked as landscaping upgrades, but no one in the neighborhood had seen any new work done. Thousands of dollars gone, every month. And the checks. Many were written to a company called Green Haven Services. Ethan looked it up and almost laughed. The company didn't exist. It was just a name registered under someone else, Mrs. Callahan's husband. Ethan leaned back in his chair, whispering, so that's where the money's going? He made copies of everything. Every receipt, every payment, every strange transaction. Then he began building a timeline, matching each payment to every fake fine the HOA had given homeowners. It all fit perfectly. The HOA was robbing its own residents and hiding it behind fake rules. But Ethan didn't stop there. He started attending HOA meetings more often, always calm, always polite. He'd ask small questions that seemed harmless. Hey Mrs. Callahan, how much did the last park cleanup cost again? Oh, and who handled the contractor work for the clubhouse repairs? She'd answer with her usual fake smile, not realizing Ethan was recording every word. Slowly, piece by piece, he collected proof, video, audio, and documents. He didn't want revenge anymore. He wanted justice. Weeks passed. Ethan became the quiet talk of the neighborhood. Some said he was crazy for going against the HOA. Others whispered that he might actually win. Then one evening, while walking his dog, Ethan ran into Linda, a kind neighbor who used to be part of the HOA years ago. She looked around nervously before speaking. Ethan, be careful, she whispered. You don't know what they're capable of. I tried to question their spending once. Next week, they fined me for yard clutter and made my life miserable. Ethan nodded. I believe you. But I'm not stopping. Linda hesitated, then pulled out a small folder from her bag. Then you'll need this. Inside were old meeting notes, hidden copies of budgets, and even an email chain between Mrs. Callahan and a city inspector. One that proved they'd bribed him to ignore illegal construction on Callahan's property. Ethan thanked her quietly. You just gave me the missing piece. That night, Ethan laid everything out on his table. Photos, documents, voice clips, receipts. He looked at it all, spread before him like a puzzle. He could expose them now. He had enough to destroy the entire HOA board. But Ethan smiled faintly and shook his head. No, he whispered. Not yet. If he went public too early, they'd twist the story, make him look like the villain. He needed to make them expose themselves first. And that's when the idea hit him. The HOA had announced a neighborhood beautification contest. A big public event with cameras, decorations, and news coverage. Mrs. Callahan wanted it to be her shining moment, proof of her perfect leadership. Ethan saw something else in it, An opportunity. He'd volunteer to help. He'd get close enough to plant the final trap, one that would reveal every secret they'd been hiding. He sat back, smiling as the plan formed in his mind. For weeks they had made his life miserable. Now he was going to make them beg for his forgiveness. The war had entered its next phase. And this time Ethan wasn't defending himself. He was hunting. The next HOA meeting was louder than usual. Everyone was talking about the upcoming neighborhood beautification contest. Mrs. Callahan stood at the front, her pearls glimmering under the fluorescent lights, her voice filled with fake excitement. "This event," she said proudly, "will show the city what a perfect community looks like. We'll have decorations, judges, and news coverage. It'll be wonderful." The crowd clapped. But Ethan just smiled quietly from the back of the room. He already knew this event was the perfect chance to end it all. When Mrs. Callahan asked for volunteers, Ethan raised his hand. "I'd love to help," he said calmly. Her smile froze for half a second before she recovered. "Well, that's very kind of you, Mr. Parker. I suppose we can find something for you to do." Inside, Ethan knew she didn't trust him, but she couldn't say no in front of everyone. That was his first small victory. Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked quietly with the other volunteers. He helped plan decorations, banners, and signs. But behind his polite smile, he was setting something else in motion, a carefully built trap. He installed small, high-quality cameras around the park to record the contest for the HOA website. Everyone thought it was a great idea. Even Mrs. Callahan nodded approvingly. What no one knew was that the cameras were also recording sound, every meeting, every payment, every whispered argument. He also used one of the HOA's laptops to edit event posters. But while working, he secretly copied all their financial files onto a flash drive. And that's when he found something new. A secret folder labeled simply "Personal." Inside were private emails between Mrs. Callahan and other board members, talking about how to cover missing funds and silence homeowners who complained too much. Ethan's heartbeat quickened as he read the words. They weren't just dishonest. They were criminals. As the event day drew near, Ethan pretended to be cheerful. He helped paint fences, hang lights, and arrange flowers, all while hiding small microphones under tables and benches. Every move was careful. Every detail planned. The night before the event, he sat on his porch under the quiet sky, watching his neighborhood glow with new decorations. Children laughed in the distance, lights twinkled, and everything looked peaceful, almost perfect. But Ethan knew the truth. That perfect picture was built on lies, fear, and corruption. He whispered to himself, "Tomorrow it all ends." The next morning, the park was buzzing with excitement. Tables filled with snacks, neighbors dressed up, and a banner stretched across the entrance. "Welcome to the Greenfield HOA beautification event." Mrs. Callahan arrived in her finest dress, shaking hands and smiling for the camera crew she had invited. She looked like the queen of the neighborhood, proud, untouchable, powerful. And Ethan? He looked like just another volunteer carrying a clipboard and smiling politely. But under his calm face, everything was already in motion. His hidden cameras were live. His laptop was ready. And in a few hours he would press send, an email that would change everything. At noon, Mrs. Callahan gathered everyone around. "Let's celebrate our beautiful community," she declared. "Thanks to the HOA's leadership, we have one of the best neighborhoods in the city." The crowd clapped and cheered. Cameras flashed. Ethan stood quietly at the back, pretending to applaud. But inside he was waiting for one thing, the moment when she'd slip up. When her pride would push her to say too much. And she did. When a reporter asked her about HOA finances, Mrs. Callahan laughed and said loudly, "Oh, don't worry. Every penny is spent properly. Our records are spotless." Ethan's eyes flickered. That was it. The lie, caught on camera with witnesses. He took a slow breath. "It's time," he whispered. He walked toward his laptop, opened his folder, and clicked send. Within seconds, every homeowner in the neighborhood, and several local reporters, received an email from Ethan Parker. Attached were videos, financial files, and proof of everything. And as the crowd kept cheering, completely unaware of what was about to happen, Ethan looked toward Mrs. Callahan and thought, "Let's see how perfect you look when the truth comes out." The crowd cheered. Laughter filled the air. Children ran between tables, neighbors smiled for cameras. It was a perfect day in Greenfield. Except for one thing. Ethan had just pressed send. Within minutes, phones began to buzz across the park. People glanced down at their screens, confused. Then frowns spread. Whispers started. And soon, silence. Mrs. Callahan stood on the small stage, smiling proudly as she posed for photos, until she noticed the looks on everyone's faces. "What's going on?" she asked, her smile faltering. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. A man near the front spoke up, holding his phone. "Mrs. Callahan," he said loudly, "is this true? These are emails with your name on them, showing you paid your husband thousands from HOA funds." Gasps filled the air. Cameras turned. Reporters raised their microphones. Mrs. Callahan's face went pale. "What? That's nonsense," she stammered. "This is fake. Someone's trying to ruin our community." But then another voice shouted, "There's a video too." Everyone's phones buzzed again. Ethan had included footage from his hidden cameras. The crowd watched as clips showed HOA board members taking cash payments, laughing about extra fines, and mocking homeowners behind their backs. One clip even caught Mrs. Callahan saying, "They'll pay whatever we tell them to. What are they going to do? Fight the HOA?" Now they were watching it in real life, the moment she had sealed her own fate. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in anger. Reporters began filming everything. Ethan stood still, hands in his pockets, watching the chaos unfold. For months he had dreamed of this moment, the truth laid bare for all to see. Mrs. Callahan's board members panicked. Some tried to deny everything. Others slipped quietly away from the stage. But the neighbors weren't listening anymore. Dozens of homeowners surrounded the stage, shouting questions, demanding answers. "Where's our money? Why did you fine us for nothing? You said everything was for the good of the community." Mrs. Callahan raised her hands helplessly. "Please, everyone calm down." But it was too late. One reporter stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Ma'am, can you confirm these payments from the HOA account to your husband's company?" The woman opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her confidence was gone. Her smile, her control, gone. Ethan slowly walked forward through the crowd. People stepped aside as he moved closer to the stage. Mrs. Callahan's eyes widened as she saw him. "You," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You did this." Ethan stopped a few feet away, calm and steady. "No, Mrs. Callahan," he said softly. "You did this to yourself." The tension in the air was heavy. Cameras flashed. Reporters recorded every word. Ethan looked around at his neighbors, faces filled with shock, anger, and realization. For months they had feared this woman. Now they saw the truth. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "All I ever wanted was peace. But peace doesn't come from fear. It comes from fairness." The crowd fell silent. Then, slowly, people began to clap. One, then another, then more, until the entire park echoed with applause. Mrs. Callahan turned red, her eyes darting around for a way out. But there was none. The truth was everywhere now, in inboxes, on social media, and soon in the news. That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. But it was different this time. The doors were open and everyone was invited. Mrs. Callahan tried to speak, but the homeowners were done listening. One by one, they voted to remove her and every board member from their positions. When it was done, she sat in silence, defeated. Ethan watched quietly from the back of the room. For the first time he saw her not as a bully, but as someone who had built her own cage and finally got trapped inside it. As he stood to leave, Mrs. Callahan called out softly, "Ethan, wait." He turned. She looked down, ashamed. I went too far. I'm sorry." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Apology accepted," he said calmly. "But forgiveness, that takes time." And he walked out, leaving her behind in the silence she had created. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. For years, Greenfield had been a place of quiet fear, lawns trimmed to perfection, smiles that never reached the eyes, neighbors too afraid to speak. But now everything felt lighter. People talked openly in the streets again. Children played in driveways without being scolded. And for the first time, the red warning papers had stopped appearing on doors. The HOA board was gone. Or at least it was falling apart. After the event, Mrs. Callahan and her board members tried to deny everything, but the evidence was everywhere. News channels picked up the story, calling it the HOA scandal of Greenfield. Homeowners were furious. They demanded answers and justice. When the next emergency meeting was called, the small community center overflowed. Neighbors who had avoided meetings for years showed up, holding phones, screenshots, and copies of the leaked files. Ethan sat quietly in the back row. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Mrs. Callahan stood at the front, pale and trembling. The confident woman who once ruled the neighborhood with fear now looked like a stranger, fragile, small, and cornered. She tried to begin her speech. "Everyone please. I made mistakes, yes, but this." Someone shouted from the crowd, "You stole from us." Another yelled, "You threatened my wife over a flower pot." Voices rose in anger. The crowd no longer feared her. Ethan finally stood up. The room fell quiet. He walked to the front and faced her calmly. "You said once that rules keep people in line," he said softly. "But what happens when the people making the rules break them?" Mrs. Callahan's lip trembled. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Maybe not," Ethan replied. "But it did. And now the neighborhood deserves better." He turned to the crowd. "We don't need fear to live peacefully. We need fairness. We need trust." The crowd murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. For the first time, people looked at Ethan not as a troublemaker, but as someone who had stood up for all of them. A motion was raised to remove the entire HOA board. The vote was unanimous. In a single night, years of corruption ended. Mrs. Callahan stood frozen as the decision was read aloud. Her name stripped from every title, every document. Tears filled her eyes. When the meeting ended, people walked past her without a word. But as Ethan prepared to leave, she turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, I don't know how to fix this." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You can start by admitting what you did. And then, let the rest of us rebuild." She nodded, tears falling. For once she had no power, only regret. In the following days things began to change. Neighbors started working together to clean the park, repaint fences, and replant the community garden. The same place that once symbolized control now became a place of freedom. Ethan helped where he could, but he never boasted. He didn't need to. Everyone knew the truth, he had stood up when no one else could. One evening as the sun set, Linda, the neighbor who had helped him with old records, walked over with a warm smile. "You know," she said, "you could run for HOA president. People would vote for you." Ethan chuckled. "President? After all this, I'm not sure I want the title." "Maybe not for power," Linda said softly, "but for peace." Ethan thought for a moment. He looked around, at the children playing, the neighbors chatting freely, the sunflowers by his fence still standing tall. And he smiled. "All right," he said, "maybe for peace." A week later, a new vote was held. It was quick, simple, and unanimous. Ethan Parker, the man once targeted by the HOA, was now its new president. But this time things would be different. No more threats. No more fear. Just fairness. The same people who once avoided him now stopped by to thank him. Mrs. Callahan's house sat dark and quiet, her car gone, her name removed from the records. And as Ethan walked past the park one last time that night, he whispered, "The fight's over. And we finally won." But deep down he knew the victory wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had once been afraid to speak, until someone showed them how. The vote was over. Ethan Parker, the quiet man who once received endless warning letters, was now the new president of the Greenfield HOA. When his name was announced, the crowd broke into applause. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now smiled with relief. For the first time, Greenfield felt like a real community again. Ethan stood before them, a little stunned. He never wanted power, he just wanted peace. But maybe, he thought, peace begins when the right people hold power. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to control anyone," he said simply. "I'm here to make things fair." The room fell quiet, then filled with soft applause. That moment marked a new beginning. Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to rebuild what the old HOA had destroyed. He opened every meeting to the public. No more secrets. No more closed doors. He posted clear budgets online so every homeowner could see where the money went. He ended the ridiculous fines. No more penalties for mailbox colors or cheerful gnomes. And instead of threatening letters, neighbors started receiving thank you notes for improving their homes. The community transformed almost overnight. The park that once hosted fake beautification events now held weekend picnics. The clubhouse became a place for family gatherings, not HOA arguments. And for the first time, people actually looked forward to meetings. But not everyone was celebrating. Mrs. Callahan still lived in Greenfield, though she rarely left her house. Her name had become a shadow, whispered but never spoken loudly. One afternoon, Ethan was reviewing paperwork at the park when he saw her walking slowly across the grass. She looked older now, tired, her confidence gone. "Mrs. Callahan," he said politely, standing up. She hesitated, then nodded. "Ethan, or should I say President Parker?" she said with a weak smile. He chuckled softly. Just Ethan is fine. She looked around at the happy families, the clean park, the laughter. You really did it, she said quietly. You turned them all against me, and still made them love you. Ethan shook his head. I didn't turn anyone. You did that yourself. I just showed them the truth. She lowered her eyes. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I told myself I was keeping things perfect. But I was just keeping control. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was calm, filled with the sound of children playing. Then Mrs. Callahan sighed. I wanted to come here today to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Ethan studied her face. The woman who once ruled with fear now looked small, human. He nodded slowly. I accept your apology, he said softly. But what matters most is that the people forgive you in time. Everyone deserves a second chance, even you. Tears filled her eyes and she nodded, whispering, Thank you. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the park in silence. That evening, Ethan stood alone in the same spot, watching the sun set behind the houses. The sky burned gold and orange, and he felt something he hadn't felt in months, peace. His phone buzzed with a message from Linda. You did it, Ethan. You gave this place back its heart. He smiled, typing a short reply, We all did. Because deep down he knew it wasn't just his victory. It was a community's rebirth. Under Ethan's leadership, Greenfield thrived. Home values rose, neighbors became friends, and even the smallest homes looked bright with pride. The story of the HOA that turned against itself spread across the city, a reminder that truth, no matter how small, can change everything. One reporter even called it the Greenfield miracle. Ethan laughed when he heard that, but inside he felt proud. Because miracles don't just happen. Sometimes someone has to fight smart to make them real. And Ethan Parker had done exactly that. Months passed and Greenfield became almost unrecognizable. The lawns glowed with color, fences stood painted and proud, and laughter filled the evenings where once only complaints echoed. Ethan often walked down the main street with a quiet smile. The same neighbors who once whispered behind closed blinds now waved cheerfully. Some even brought him cookies or fresh lemonade as thanks. But Ethan never saw it as victory, he saw it as balance restored. One day a letter arrived in his mailbox. It was written on fancy paper, embossed with gold trim. Dear Mr. Parker, it began. On behalf of the state HOA board, we are impressed with how you turned around Greenfield. We'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference. Ethan chuckled softly. The same people who once ignored his complaints now wanted his advice. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked out at his sunflowers, the same ones that started it all. They swayed gently in the wind, tall and free, untouched by any rulebook. He whispered, Guess we won, huh? That weekend, he drove to the conference hall, where hundreds of HOA members gathered. When his name was called, Ethan stepped onto the stage, calm and confident. He didn't start with anger or revenge. Instead, he began with truth. I'm not here because I fought my HOA, he said. I'm here because I learned what happens when power forgets its purpose. He paused, letting the silence sink in. Rules are meant to protect, not to punish. Communities aren't built by fear, they're built by fairness. People leaned forward, listening closely. Even the toughest board members couldn't look away. Ethan smiled gently. And sometimes, the best way to win a fight is not to destroy your enemies but to show them a better way. The audience erupted in applause. Later that night, Ethan returned home. The streetlights flickered softly, and the air smelled like fresh rain. As he parked his car, he noticed something unexpected, a small pot of flowers on his porch. A note was tucked inside. Read, Thank you, Ethan, for teaching us what real leadership looks like. The residents of Greenfield. He smiled, his eyes warm with pride. For the first time he realized it wasn't revenge that satisfied him. It was justice, peace, and the simple joy of doing what's right. He looked up at the night sky, the stars reflecting in his eyes. Forgiveness, he whispered, feels better than any victory. And with that, Ethan Parker, the man who once battled the cruelest HOA in town, finally went inside, closing the door on his old war, and opening it to a brand new beginning. Sparkles, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is proving you never needed revenge at all.